Welcome, everyone. Happy Tuesday, October 13th. I'm Kate Byrne, president of SoCap Global and Intentional, and I'm really excited about this morning's conversation. It's the fifth in a series that we started in early September, all based around reimagining capitalism, reshaping it to drive change. And the premise is all based on a fantastic book that I encourage everyone to purchase. It's available on Amazon. That's by one of our leading speakers here, Sir Ronald Cohen, Impact, Reshaping Capitalism to Drive Real Change. Today's conversation, we're going to focus on the role of government, of policy, of us as, frankly, stakeholder and policy members as well. Well, we are joined by a terrific group that will bring a variety of voices and tenets. Of course, we were joined by Sir Ronald Cohen, who's the chairman of Portland Trust and Bridges Ventures and our author. We've got Lenny Mendoza, who is the former chief economic and business advisor for the state of California, as well as previously a senior managing partner at McKinsey. We've got Marianne Howland, who's the founder and CEO of Global Diversity Leadership Exchange and the vice president of American Business Council Board. And we've got Ron Ivy joining us from France, who is the founder and principal of Rembrandt Collective. We are moderated today by Lisa Gralnek. What we're going to do is I'm going to ask everyone to take a moment. Let us know where you're joining us from. Let us know what you'd like to hear if you've got, and then most importantly, share your questions in the chat or in the Q&A. I'm going to hand it over to Lisa. We'll have a robust conversation and then we'll start integrating the questions into the discussion. With that, Lisa.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. We are going to have a great conversation today, and I'm going to kick it off by turning to Sir Ronnie. In your forthcoming book, Impact, as Kate just held up and showed us that excellent cover, you state that our economic system is self-defeating, that unfettered capitalism has resulted in the creation of major social and environmental problems, from poverty, undereducation, unemployment, health, environmental destruction, and climate change, among others. Anyone who didn't believe this was true prior to COVID is likely now to see how interdependent and interconnected everything truly is. And we're wondering, how are we going to fix things? So in your book, you present the case for an impact economy that is not just about risk and reward of profit, but that really is risk, return, impact, which accounts for the real cost of people and planet impact, whether positive or negative. What are the top three actions, in your opinion, that governments, whether at an international, federal, or local level, can implement in order to actively shape and contribute to moving the market forward?
Thank you, Lisa. It's wonderful to be here with you, with Marianne, with Lenny, and with Ron, and of course with Kate, to look at the role of government now in bringing this impact revolution about, which I compare in the book to the tech revolution. It's clear, as you said, that our system is self-defeating. Companies create a lot of damage and governments tax us all to try to remedy it. And in the past four sessions, we have discussed the role of different stakeholders, entrepreneurs, big business leaders, investors, philanthropists. And now we come to the role of government. And I think it's important to understand that this impact revolution is driven at the start by changes in consumer preferences. So we have young people in particular stopping to purchase the products of firms whose values they don't share, refusing to work for those companies. This has made investors aware that there are implications for the profitability of their companies, and many of the investors are themselves motivated by a desire to try to sort out the huge social and environmental challenges we face, because they have seen social and economic inequality erupt into violence in the United States, most recently with the Black Lives Matter events, but we've seen it before that in France with the Gilets jaunes, in Chile, in the Lebanon, and even in the results of the Brexit referendum in the UK, where economic inequality had a lot to do with the decision for Britain to leave the EU. So the solution is to change the behavior of companies today, because it is companies that are creating the pollution, not governments. And it is companies that are exacerbating the problems of social and economic inequality by not paying people appropriately, by making differences in what they pay for different genders, and so on. And to change the behavior of companies, investors have a major role to play now. They've sort of picked the baton up, or they've come alongside consumers and employees in pushing companies in the direction of bringing solutions. So it reflects itself in $30 trillion worth of investment money going to ESG investing, environmental, social, and governance investing, that aims to reduce the harm and sometimes to bring solutions to the problems that we face environmentally and socially. Impact investment itself, where you have the intention to create the impact, but you also measure the impact created, will hit $1 trillion this year. So we're not talking of flashes in the pan here. We're talking of more than 30% of all professionally managed money in the world seeking to achieve profit as well as impact, and not just profit. So it's a major change. It's a new frontier for society and for capitalism. And it's all based on being able to measure the impact performance of companies. If you exhort companies to do good, the profit motive will overwhelm them, and they'll continue to do the same thing, which is what we have seen over the last 2 decades of trying to get companies to reduce their carbon emissions. But if investors begin to make their decisions on the basis of both the profit and the impact performance of companies, and if you begin to see reflected in the numbers which are being published about impact performance, in particular at Harvard Business School, where 1,800 companies' environmental damage is measured and valued, and where you discover that out of 1,800 companies, 250 create more environmental damage in a year than they deliver a profit, where a third of all those companies, 600 companies, create environmental damage equivalent to 25% or more of their profit. When you begin to see that impact transparency come through on the operating impact on the environment, when you begin to see the figures coming through on diversity, on the employment impact of companies, when you look at a company like Intel, highly respected for the way it seeks the well-being of its employees and pushes diversity, and you look at Intel's diversity relative to the demographics around its facilities, and you realize that there's a huge gap, and there's also a gap in gender pay and other benefits, and that reduces, that lack of diversity and equality of opportunity reduces the positive impact of its $7 billion wage bill in the United States each year by half, to $3.5 billion from $7 billion. You begin to understand how transparency can begin to tackle environmental and social issues. And we will be publishing similar figures in the next few weeks on employment impact and also on product impact. And in the course of the next few months, we will be expanding the number of companies that we analyze. We're going to take the products of companies in 11 sectors or more, and we're going to analyze what they do to the health and well-being of people, and we're going to value that impact, and we will be able to have a total view on the impact that companies create as well as their profit. And the big question that you ask, Lisa, what are the three things that governments have to do to get us to that? Because that transparency is the key to the systemic change we need if we're going to create the kind of world we want to live in, which is a fairer and a more sustainable world. The three things have to do with the COVID crisis effects, as well as this goal. Governments are going to emerge from the COVID crisis with huge national debt and very constrained budgets. At the same time, we're going to have high levels of unemployment running for many years. A lot of the people who've been furloughed aren't going to be able to go back to the jobs they had in big companies. We're going to have to reskill many of these people. We're going to have peaks in homelessness. We're going to have issues of poverty with elderly populations, single parents who lose their jobs. We're going to need to fund our charitable sector so it can help deal with the most vulnerable. And so the first thing that governments are going to have to do is to encourage impact investment in all its forms to flow to tackle these key challenges that we're going to face. And that involves providing incentives for social impact bonds or pay for success bonds, as they're called in the United States, creating outcomes funds that pay out at the center of government, perhaps with the help of philanthropists as well, that pay out when these pay for success targets have been achieved, and so on. So the first thing is boost impact investment. The second thing is this hugely important thing of impact transparency. I compare our situation today, historically, to the situation after the 1929 Great Crash. When people lost a huge amount of money in 1929, they realized that they'd been investing in companies without really understanding what profit they made. Because each company could use its own accounting principles to measure its profit, and there were no auditors to verify the numbers. And in 1933, the US government took the lead, which the world followed thereafter, and mandated that we must use the same accounting principles for every company, irrespective of its size, of its sector, and that auditors must verify these numbers. Well, some people argued then it would spell the end of American capitalism. Today, we know that that's what the whole massive financial market is based on, that profit transparency. We're in the same position today, where investors need the impact transparency that we get on profit in order to make the right investment decisions. Already we can see in the Harvard data set that this ESG money I've been talking about has been tilting the scales in favor of the companies that pollute less within a given sector. They're just worth more. They're valued more highly. And so there's a cost that is beginning to come through for those who create harm. And the same will be true with the diversity numbers when they come through. And so the second thing is for governments to mandate, as the US government did in 1933, impact transparency on the basis of impact-weighted financial accounts so that we can use all the tools of financial analysis that we use today on accounts that also reflect the impact of a company. And the third thing, and I'll stop after that, is we need to tweak the duties and obligations of company directors and trustees of pension funds and charitable endowments. Today, they could interpret their regulation and legislation as saying they may take into account other factors than financial ones in making their decisions. Social and environmental ones, obviously, are key, are uppermost in my mind. We have to shift that to they must take into account social and environmental and other impacts when they make their decisions. Unfortunately, the current administration has reversed a first step in this direction, which the previous administration had taken. But across the world, I think that has to be the third item of the government agenda.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. And it's incredible the amount of work that you all are doing to bring transparency and information to bear on this conversation. So thank you for sharing some of that amazing work. Lenny, I'm going to turn to you. You're a Californian, an entrepreneur, and recent economic advisor to Gavin Newsom, the governor. California, over the past, let's say, decade and a half, and really the past 2 decades, has had an outsized benefit of the tech revolution, of innovation, the prosperity and wealth created in this period of expansion, if you will. It's also been on the cutting edge of social and environmental policy. What is the relationship, in your opinion, between innovation and the future of impact? How is it that you're seeing governments be able to kind of move faster, to embrace science, to embrace data, to embrace technology, to ensure that this growth and prosperity continues?
Thank you, Lisa. And it's a great pleasure to be here as well. It's particularly a pleasure for me to, again, be with Sir Ronnie, who I have great admiration for, who has continuously been just slightly ahead of the curve about not just where the world should be going, but how to get it from here to there. And so it's an important conversation that we're having, that I do think the perspective that Sir Ronnie just outlined around aligning government policy with broader objectives is exactly the direction that we need to go, and what we're attempting to do in California. The role, slightly different language, but I do think there's a very important role that government can play to ensure that innovation continues to occur. And in fact, if anything, we need more innovation, not less innovation, but that it is aligned with a broader sense of impact. We need a vibrant economy that continues to create value, market value, that continues to create jobs, that continues to improve productivity and find new ways to do things with less resource. But it needs to be done in a way that is an economy that is innovative, but is much, much more inclusive, much more sustainable, and much more resilient to things that hit us, whether it's things that we can anticipate and we know are going to come eventually, like economic cycles, or whether it's things that we don't anticipate but may hit us, like COVID. So government has a really, really important role in all of those dimensions. At the least, government plays a really important role in establishing standards and transparency around those standards. Sir Ronnie gave us a nice historical perspective on how rules of the game and accounting standards, while seemingly arcane, are extraordinarily important for how capital flows and how the incentives and alignment of corporate behavior to accomplishing broader objectives happens. It's true for larger enterprises, publicly traded ones, but it's also true for how new enterprises begin and quickly in today's economy grow from being something in someone's garage to something that can globally influence outcomes, whether that's in positive ways or in ways that can be challenging. And so we need to establish those rules for new enterprises to align with broader standards as well. The second thing that government obviously does is establish more formally the regulatory and legislative environment within which people can operate. So it's one thing to establish standards and transparency, another thing to enforce them or create expectations that in things like climate and carbon reduction, that there are increasing expectations for what the science says needs to happen, and people are held accountable for delivering those either through direct taxing costs or through incentives. And that's the second important role. The final one that is important is that government can use its scale directly. Its scale directly in its voice for establishing the importance and continuing to reinforce the value of data and science for fact-based decision-making. It can use its scale to ensure that it practices what it preaches. So government should be in every way having as high or higher standards for diversity and inclusion than it does an expectation for the private sector. It should have an alignment of what it does with its own purchasing, its own grants, its own, when money flows out of government, to ensure that where that money goes is to entities that are meeting the standards and expectations for a high road economy, for diversity and inclusion, for carbon emissions, et cetera. And I think when government really has clarity and alignment around all three of those things, it can make a big difference. Unfortunately, we're now in an environment where at the federal level in the United States, at least in the administration, there is a lack of appreciation for data and science that makes it hard to get that alignment. But that doesn't mean that we should be pessimistic about that. It means that there's an important role when it is aligned to help deliver value, and to deliver value in ways that are both creating continuing innovation, market and financial gains, as well as a more inclusive, sustainable, and resilient economy at the same time.
I think that nails it, and it sets up Marianne so interestingly. I know you've done many things and have many roles, most notably in really driving diversity and inclusion conversation for the better part of 20 years. But your foundation is as a communications expert and how we communicate these things. So I'm quite fascinated, Marianne. We think about government as an entity, but we think about governance, which is in many ways the role of government among others, as kind of the definition being the rules, the norms, the language that we use to describe something, to build this common understanding, both of what government does, right, which is create those norms and rules and language, as well as therefore hopefully to being enforcing them, or as we've just heard about, encouraging that. So I'm curious, as a communications expert, how do you think governments can better communicate this conversation about market impact and really help shape what Ronnie in his book says is the impact revolution, or really a race to the top?
Well, thank you for that perfect question. But first, let me start by saying to Ronnie, congratulations on your book. Thank you for writing it. I know several of the people and businesses that you refer to in the book as examples, because I've had the unique opportunity to learn from them as well. I met most of them through the Social Venture Network, which was founded in 1987 by Josh Melman and Wayne Silby, as you may well remember. And they sort of laid the groundwork for those triple bottom line mission-driven businesses. So it was a joy to kind of refresh my memory with their stories. Now, with regard to communicating the message. So the American Sustainable Business Council is a membership organization of businesses who use their voices to participate in a democracy. And let me give a little preamble around the importance of democracy. So Ronnie talks about how government has a lot of power in impact outcomes, and as does investment. And a good example is COVID. So COVID, we're going to have a vaccine in 2 years. So that was government investment in research and development with our tax dollars that went to private companies with little accountability except to shareholders. Now, what if those companies did practice transparency, as we're talking about, and were accountable, and they were in the form of benefit corporations, for example. So, and also to consider in this rush to find this treatment or cure, who's going to have access to it? Who's going to be able to afford it? Will it be up to philanthropists? Is it going to be up to social impact investors and entrepreneurs to find a way to get it to those who need it? So we have to remember that in a democracy, and especially in America, where this experiment and people owning our government, we are the government. So our governance requires holding people accountable. That includes our political leaders and our companies. And how do we do that? Well, we do that with transparency. We do that. We need goals for public good and measurement and reporting, and we have to demand it. And how do we understand those good goals for public good? Well, that's by us as tax-paying citizens of the country communicating our needs and our messages with our elected officials. It means engaging. It means making sure that yes, you need to vote, absolutely, but not just for the presidency, every 4 years, but in every state and local election. Communications is a responsibility on our part to make sure that we understand what are the issues, what are the needs of our community, and give voice to that. And what the American Sustainable Business Council does is aggregate those voices and come to consensus around what are the needs that are in the best interest of a sustainable, regenerative, use your word of the moment in terms of where we're going with a better economy for all. And in fact, we've been working together with about 100 plus business leaders across the country over the past year to develop what is a political strategy for an economy that works for all. And that document, we're right now in the process of disseminating and sharing with everyone. And we're asking you, the viewers, anybody who's interested in reading this, to please take a read, get back to us, let us know your thoughts about it, because in order for us to be effective in communicating to this next hopefully incoming administration it's going to be more aligned with our values, what are our goals? What is it that we need in order to be an economy that is more inclusive? The one where we begin to work on eradicating systemic racism, undoing bad laws. And all of that comes from us. So that the importance of the communications marketing is making sure that we are participating in the conversation. And that includes business owners as well, who are people who are just citizens in the community. Because as business owners, we have a role in our communities as leaders, as responsible for employing workers. What is the small business community? We're the biggest employers in the country. We have a responsibility and an impact for for the communities where we live, work, and pray. And we have a responsibility to our customers. We have a responsibility to our stakeholders, and we can marshal all of that and leverage it for good. So that would be my, I think the most effective way that we can really move the needle is using our voices, our vote, how we shop as well, where we spend our dollars. Think about, when we think about the rise of social impact businesses, think of the Patagonias and the Stonyfield Farms and the Whole Foods and all these companies that seventh generation that have become the role model for success and are growing to bigger business. How did that happen? Because we, the consumer, believed in those principles that they practiced and invested in those companies and helped them grow. So they've proven the power of our dollar. They're proof. And then the other thing, of course, is by making sure that we pay attention to where we invest our dollars. And that's another communication tool. Where you invest your dollar speaks volumes. Where you put your money overnight, where you are directing the future of the economy and of the global economy by where you invest. So take a look at your portfolio and ask questions about it. Make sure you talk to your financial planner and ask them, where is my money invested? I care. I want to make sure that I'm investing in social impact companies. Those kinds of activities, which are things that ASBC stands for, and this is what we work for businesses to help them understand these opportunities and responsibilities and communicate them, and make our voices heard on Capitol Hill.
Thanks so much. I think that conversation around voice seems to be something that's coming up a lot in our individual, our collective roles that we all need to play. Ron, I think it tees up nicely some of the work that you've been doing as a fellow at the Boston Consulting Group Center for Public Impact. I know some of the work you guys are doing right now is launching a new initiative that's really focused on collective action that engages the private sector, the public sector, the civil sector in building this truly inclusive economy. I think about, the role of multilateralism, the role of the public-private partnership as really being white space for innovation right now and necessary for moving things forward. What are the biggest issues that you see require coordinated action between government, private, civil, et cetera? And what models are you seeing emerge to kind of drive this impact?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. That's a great tee up. And thanks to Ronnie for the opportunity to join in the panel and to promote the great work that's in your book. I think, Lisa, to your question about what are the big problems, I think obviously climate change is a driving issue for everyone around the world, here in France, in the United States, of course. But I think, to tackle those kinds of challenges, we have to have a legitimate relationship with our government. We have to have trust. We have to have social cohesion. And one of the things that's undermining both the legitimacy of our governments, and this is both in the United States, but also in other countries around the world. So Ronnie mentioned some of the other movements that have been in resistance and in critiquing governments around the world. Wealth inequality is a major driver around the world right now, and a driver of that distrust. And I think there's a recognition in the conversations we've had with economists, with social experts, with sociologists, with business leaders, is that there's a fundamental frailty right now in the system. There's a top heaviness to the system that's creating what an engineer would call negative stability. It's designed to fall apart. And I think what we've got to figure out collectively, there are actions that government can take. Government can think about tax policy. It can think about competition policy in terms of market concentration, which is a major issue right now. It can also think about how are investments in education, in community wealth, how are those investments spread? Are they concentrating in a few cities, or are they spread throughout the country? And in the United States, we've been very intentional about spreading that investment out, both in the 19th century, but also in the 20th century. I was a benefit of the land grant college in Oklahoma, where I'm from. This was designed as a way to get education into areas that did not have access to education. And I was able to get out of, and my family was able to get out of poverty because of that. We need to be that creative with those kinds of thinking as it relates to geographic inequality, which is a driving issue around the world. The other issue is, the relationship between government and business, and how government regulates the economy and regulates the structure of the economy in terms of reporting. And I think this is a really important point that Sarani's making about the role of reporting and transparency. And the fact that we've had decreasing transparency over the last 30, 40 years is a factor in this problem of wealth concentration and market concentration. So I think that's an important topic we need to be talking about today as we think about solving the problem.
That's great. I appreciate that, Ron. I'm watching time. I want to lob one more question before seeing if we have any questions from the audience, and then we can keep speaking if not. But everyone on this panel are trailblazers in your own right, and really helping drive this impact economy, if you will, forward from the 80s in some cases, certainly for the last 20 or so years. I think what's so interesting, so Ronnie spoke about the gap accounting principles that emerged out of the 1929 stock crash that allowed the prosperity of the last 100 or so years to happen. We're looking, Sir Ronnie, you founded venture capital. I mean, obviously in the 80s, things like capital gains taxes allowed that kind of wealth to be created and paved the way. As all of you see in your own sectors and more broadly, what are the actions or the people or the initiatives or the great ideas that are really giving you, there's so much happening, as we spoke about in our prep, there's so much momentum right now around impact because people are seeing that it's needed. But what are the things you guys are each seeing that is giving you the greatest hope and the greatest positive? Because we all know that there's lots of ways of being pessimistic, but what's giving us optimism?
So if I go first, Lisa, you seem to be looking at me. What gives me optimism is that transparency and the fairer tax system go together. What do I mean by that? If you have transparency, if you have audited numbers on the impact of companies, you can tax them directly. There's a single company in the data set at Harvard that creates $200 billion worth of environmental damage in a year. There are many companies manufacturing products that are household names that are creating more environmental damage than profit in a year. And I imagine you have a system where you tax companies on their profit minus the positive impact they created. All of a sudden, you give a big incentive for companies to create positive impact. Imagine you tax those that are creating environmental damage directly on the quantum of damage. If you're making $1 billion worth of damage a year, how much should you be taxed on that? And then you can reduce the taxation on those who are not creating that damage. It's much fairer. So what gives me hope is that as we begin to think through the implications of impact transparency, government will come to realize that it brings investors alongside and companies in which they invest to bring solutions that government doesn't have the means or usually the entrepreneurship to develop and the innovation that is needed to develop them, but also that it gives government the tool for more effective expenditure and fairer taxation.
Who else wants to take it? Thank you for that. I love the idea, by the way, I just have to say, in your book about, which I know not everyone here can read quite yet, but who's watching, but when you can read it, this idea of how do you actually create basic, accounting principles that are globally relevant that account for these impacts. It's fabulous, and it seems basic. It will take a long time to get there, but it is so important.
Lisa, I'll give you one example, an arena that I am excited about, which talked a little bit about earlier, but at scale, is the opportunity for innovation and new enterprises to help address some of these challenges. So just to give you one small example, although it's not small anymore, in California for a while now, they've established a set of standards and expectations for everything from electric appliance usage of energy through to now auto emission standards, and recently enacted executive order to by 2030 have no carbon emitting vehicles on the roads for new vehicles. In that time frame, California has both reduced its carbon footprint and expanded its economy in dramatic ways, and at the same time done it in a way which almost by definition, when you put those two variables together, reduced its energy and carbon intensity of the GDP. Many at the time said that would ruin California's economy, that it would not be possible. Actually turns out the number two product export from the state of California last year, and maybe the number one this year, is zero emission vehicles. So from something in an industry that didn't exist a decade ago to its number one export, and in fact, dramatically moving the auto industry to move to zero emission vehicles, and now extending into buses and trucks. I mean, I do think there is an opportunity when the elements are aligned to utilize the power of the private sector to invest its capital and utilize its innovation to both create enormous value, shareholder value, but also help solve some of these daunting challenges.
For sure. And I think California is a case study. I mean, just to put in context quickly, I mean, California's GDP is just slightly smaller than India's and quite just a little bit bigger than Germany's, I think, or maybe I'm reversing those. But I mean, it's the most populous state. It's my home state, so I have great heart, of course, for it as well. But I mean, I think what California is doing on its own is so impactful, and of course needs to, because maybe one of the greatest hit by climate change as well. So thank you for sharing that. It's a great example.
So I'd like to say that in this, I'm looking at the screen here, and what is drastically different and gives me lots of hope, if I'm looking at 3 white men talking about inequality and systemic racism. I feel good about that. So I feel like there's progress about to be made. One of the things that COVID has really revealed is that we're going through several crises, including the crisis of survival for so many people. And survival innovation is key to an impact revolution, that's tied to land and food and climate. We know the history of the colonizers and how they came in and extracted for gain, and they stripped resources with no consideration for human value. And now we have an opportunity to restore and not only restore opportunity in the economy, but respect and dignity. And, when I think about this move towards diversity and inclusion and building an economy that is more inclusive, when BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color become business owners and investors, communities grow. Many are survival innovators. When you think about recycling, that became the trend of the 70s, but who are the master recyclers? We made chitlins a gourmet dish, okay? And when you think of solutions providers, typically you think of white people, but who are the service providers? Black and brown people. Should be the other way around. The service providers are on the ground. We get to see it up close. So I think that the opportunity for people now to really begin to think about sourcing for ideas and innovation and bringing more people into not only inside the workforce for R&D, but on boards of directors, and most importantly, investing in. So, and I'm going to make a personal pitch, but it's directly relevant. So I'm about to launch a new enterprise that looks at business strategy through a disability lens, another marginalized population. My son has a disability, so I've seen the challenges and opportunities up close, but we know that people with disabilities is a $1.8 trillion global market. And it's always been viewed as a medical market, a place for, wheelchairs and medications and, tubes and whatever. But it's also a consumer market and a rich talent resource. And some companies are beginning to recognize that. You have Richard Branson with the Advantage 500, and you've got, Microsoft's CEO, whose son, I think, has cerebral palsy, are now beginning to recognize that there's a lot of talent, resource, and along with the dignity of work, we want to provide the dignity of functionable fashion that allows people to dress for success and to self-express like everyone else. So instead of being invisible, letting your light shine. So the company we're created, it allows people to do that, to be their full selves so they can make their own world better. So, and one of the things that I'm also really fond of, and I think is going to make a tremendous difference, which Sir Ronnie covers extensively in the book, is our social impact bonds. I think those are such a great idea. And we should make sure that business owners of color receive them so that they have an opportunity to invest in the kinds of solutions that are going to make, I think, the most difference in the impact of society going forward. And in fact, in the American Sustainable Business Council, I talked about this document, this policy strategy that we've put together. And at the forefront of it, we believe that racial equity must be a foundational part of any public policy recommendations that seek to create this economy that's going to work for all. It's a moral and an economic imperative. And you talked about some indices and what are the initiatives that are, well, the 2018 Growth Productivity Revenues Output Report from the Kellogg Foundation says that beyond an increase in economic output, advancing racial equity can translate into meaningful increases in consumer spending, as well as federal and state local tax revenues, and decreases in social services spending and health-related costs. For example, in consumer spending alone, closing the racial equity gap in the US would generate an additional $191 billion spent on food, $500 billion on housing, $52 billion on apparel, $259 billion on transportation, and $77 billion on entertainment each year. That's federal tax revenues increasing by $450 billion, and state and local tax revenues would increase by $100 billion annually. So what does that tell you? So like I said, it's encouraging to hear people on this call talking about the importance of racial equity, because I think that is the future. That bodes well on an economy that is going to work for all.
Thanks so much, Marianne. The passion is, and the expertise is so notable. So thank you for sharing that perspective. And congratulations on the new product launch coming up.
Thank you.
Ron, I think the same question goes to you, but if you, I mean, you're in France right now. You've been working with international leaders everywhere. Can you share what's giving you hope that might be happening outside of your home country?
Yeah, no, I think one of the things I'm really encouraged by is some of the conversations I've been having with economists, and they're shifting paradigms that are happening around the world around the purpose of economics, the purpose of an economy. I think older paradigms were purpose of an economy is to grow. Now we're saying, no, the purpose of an economy is human flourishing. And not just happiness, not just self-satisfaction, but this kind of richer, deeper understanding of flourishing, which is about meaning, it's about purpose, it's about relationships, it's about community, it's about ecology. And that deeper sense of flourishing, I think, is really tees up and is supported by the infrastructure of impact. Because you can begin to draw this line between impact and flourishing. I think you're going to see, I think, a revolution in the economics field. You're going to see that impact and affect the way that we think about policy in a different way. And I think that'll ultimately impact the way that we design financial systems, monetary systems, et cetera. So that gives me hope that we're seeing some major paradigm shifts happening at the intellectual level of economics and economic policy.
It's certainly very hopeful when you have the people who actually understand the systems that we've created and then can also move forward and implement policy. Making those changes, that seems very, very promising. So I like that optimism as well. Kate, should I lob one more question into the group? I don't see a whole bunch of questions. So I'm going to just ask everyone. I think, Marianne, you said it previously, which is really about if we, the people, are in fact government. And this is true in every democracy anywhere in this world, right? Ultimately, and it should be the case everywhere in this world, but if we, the people, are government, what must we be doing as individual citizens to be the change we want to see? To all of you guys.
Ooh. Well, we have to participate. We all have a responsibility as citizens and global citizens to participate. And participation means that you need to take the time to understand the issues. And I was starting with just asking yourself the question, what do you care about? And what are you willing to fight for? And if you start there, then begin to take the time to find out what are the policies, or what is the agenda, or what's the campaign, or what do people stand for on those issues, and support them. If they align with your values, support them. One of the things that I want to really drive home too, that I think is really important part of this conversation is, as it relates to government, is taking money out of politics. I think that that's a huge issue. And one of the things that there's the 28th Amendment, not to be confused with the 25th Amendment, which I know we're talking a lot about these days, but the 28th Amendment, which is an amendment to take money out of politics. And if we should all get familiar with it. All businesses should sign on to it, because once we can do that and get rid of special interest groups, and once we can do that and begin to, level the playing field for us all to have an opportunity to have an equal, where our vote is equal to every other vote. And as businesses, we get to be at the table helping with decisions that impact our small and sustainable businesses equally as the big global companies in the world that are like those R&D companies that are getting all the investment money for COVID. You know what I'm saying? So where are we at the table? So in order to do that, one of the things is making sure that we are, taking responsibility. And until we do that, we have no right to complain. I come from the school of, if you don't like what's going on and then you're not voting, or you have not written a letter to your local legislator at least once, or if you've not, done an op-ed, then I don't want to hear it. So
Grassroots.
I'm sorry?
Grassroots.
Right, exactly. It really does take us participating in it. And I think that businesses have such an opportunity, because again, small businesses being the largest segment of the employers in this country, we have a big voice and we need to use it. So I think that the most important thing we can possibly do is engage. And like I said, it really just starts with a personal question to yourself about, what do you really care about? What are you willing to fight for?
Thank you. Others?
If I could come in on that, Lisa. I mean, as I mentioned in Impact, this is a revolution in which every one of us on this webinar has a role to play, as Marianne has been saying. We can start to play it by no longer purchasing the goods of companies whose values we don't share. If we know company is polluting heavily and doing harm, and soon you'll have lots of information about that, let's just shift our purchases to another company. Let's not work for these companies. And if we work within a company which is open to this sort of thinking, then let's raise our voices, let's talk to our bosses, let's bring impact to the center of the conversation. Now, many of us may not have investment plans, but our parents often have pension plans. And these pension plans are being invested without their having the faintest idea, most of the time, especially if they're in a big company, what their money is being invested in. So get your parents to write to the investment managers of these pension plans and say, how much of my money is going to ESG and impact investing? It should all be going to only ESG and impact investing, because that is going to deliver the best return for my pension in the future. This isn't a question of settling for less money in order to do good. The evidence in the Harvard Business School data, you make more money, and Tesla shows it, at least in the market value, as Lenny was saying, You make more money if you optimize risk return and impact than if you just optimize risk return. Those companies in the future that think that they're going to be able to just make money and do well are playing wrong. They're like the companies that thought that technology was a passing thing and they could continue to ignore it. And then as entrepreneurs, I think as entrepreneurs, as Lenny was saying, we can see a new type of entrepreneur now coming into their own. They're the entrepreneurs who want to do good and do well at the same time. The Elon Musks of this world. For them, a unicorn isn't just worth $1 billion, it also improves the lives of 1 billion people. And I want to give just an insight into why these entrepreneurs will do better than the traditional entrepreneurs will do in the future. And I want to take the example of Orcam, which I mentioned in the book, an artificial intelligence company aimed at helping the blind to see, in inverted commas. Developed a pair of spectacles that whispers into the ear of the wearer the page of the book they're holding, the newspaper, the banknote in their hand, and reads it professionally. There are 35 million blind people in the world and 250 million visually impaired people. So you'd say, wow, what an amazing venture. 300 million people's lives could be improved, and what a huge market. But if you look at it from an impact point of view, you ask a fundamental question that you don't ask if you're in it just for profit. You ask the question, how can my technology help the greatest number of people in the world? And you get a surprising answer, which is, what if we gave these spectacles to the 800 million illiterate people in the world, illiterate adults in the world? What would that do for their lives and livelihoods and for their economies, or even for the world economy? And all of a sudden you have a market of 1.1 billion people in which to grow your company. So I think we mustn't accept this prevailing view, which was true about technology in the early years, that this is bound to lose you money. This is actually the way of the future. It's the way to bigger markets, to faster growth, and to attracting the best talent.
I love everything that was just said. When we believe that it, what is it? Rising tides raise all ships. It's exactly that.
So
Ron, what would you like to build on? Oh, sorry.
So Ron, you and I need to write another book on this topic. How about that?
How about that? Why not? Well, let's try to get the word out in the West Coast. If we want entrepreneurs to do the things we're talking about, let's get the book out among them. Let it be necessary reading. All the royalties are going to impact charities, okay? So this isn't a commercial gig. This is about changing the way that entrepreneurs think, so that when they ask themselves, what venture should I start? They ask the question you were asking, Marianne. What am I passionate about? What problem am I passionate about solving? And then they start to define a business model where the greater the impact they deliver, the more money they make, like Tesla, like Orcam. So let's do everything we can to get this book as widely read as we possibly can.
I love that. So I think we're coming up on time. And one of the things that we should just close out with, and thank you to all four of you for such amazing perspectives and sharing your expertise and your really incredible vision. I think what we close with is leaving that we need government and we need governance. We need government to harness the historical role of business in driving innovation and profit and prosperity and progress for the good of all. However, We need carrots versus sticks to incentivize good behavior. So co-creation and investment versus just taxes and penalty, but both. We need, obviously, transparency. That word came up over and over and over again. Trust. We need efficiency and accountability. And that comes from getting some metrics in place that enable and incentivize innovation. And I think it's really easy, as we said, to be pessimistic, but as we're all in this together, whether we're in Paris or in California or in London or Tel Aviv or in Tennessee or Brooklyn, New York, we really all need to get out there and make some noise. We need to get involved. We need to demand action from our leaders and from our companies. And there's certainly no time to waste, as Sir Ronnie, you make so beautifully in this book that is coming out in just a couple of weeks' time now on impact. So thank you.
And with
Thank
that, we will close out. Thank you all. Lisa, thanks very much for the facilitation of a really terrific, robust conversation. I think this entire series has just painted such a full, clear picture of what needs to happen. And as everyone here has said, it's transparency, it's rolling our sleeves up, it's recognizing that each one of us can make an impact. And it's imperative that we begin to do so. For those of you who are domestic in the US, one of the greatest things you can do is vote. Please vote, vote, vote. Use your voice. Vote also with your feet where you work, with your wallet, what you consume and what you support, and with your personal heart, with what you actually you support with portfolios and finances. So with that, Ron Ivy, thank you. Lisa Gralneck, you're terrific. Marianne Howland, yay. Thank you so much for joining the conversation. Lenny Mendoza, always a pleasure. Sir Ronnie, I'm going to miss my Tuesdays with Ronnie. So I just want to say what a joy it's been really getting to spend time with each of you. And thank you so much for just including more. To those who have listened and joined, we know you always have a choice of how you can spend your time. We're very grateful and appreciative that you spent it with us this morning. So with that, have a terrific week all. And let's go rattle some cages and make some change. All right.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, Kate.
Great to